What's up, fam? Here we go again. Another video on this hip hop controversy here. Now, this is a response video to a video that Dr. Colon had put up when he was basically challenging DJ Phase's accounts of hip hop history. So I felt that it was kind of in bad taste that he would go after DJ Phase and basically challenge him on what was really going on in the neighborhood at that time. Now, keep in mind, from what I'm able to discover, DJ Phase was born in maybe 1960 or 59. Dr. Colon was born in 67. So what you have basically, if you look at 74 as the marker, you basically have an 8-year-old telling a 15 or 16-year-old what was going down in the hood. So I found that to be kind of disrespectful. How could you, as a little kid, tell a high schooler what was going on? Clearly, this man has more credentials than you ever had growing up in the Bronx. So I just found that to be disrespectful to come at the man like that. But don't you find it ironic, right, that the people who were there at the time, the Puerto Ricans who were there at the time, like DJ Tex Hollywood, Whipple Whip, Charlie Chase, Ruby D, are nowhere to be found. They're not the ones making these videos claiming that hip hop is a 50-50 creation. Because I believe, because they were there, they know the truth, which is it comes from New York Black culture. That's where it comes from. And they're not going to put their necks on a line and embarrass themselves, unlike people like Dr. Colon and Randy are willing to do. So I'm going to try to go over a few points that I found to be interesting and worth noting, So I found it ironic that Dr. Colon would challenge DJ Phase on what he recalls growing up as a kid. So if he saw Puerto Ricans or Jamaicans dressed in a particular way, who are you to tell him he didn't see that? Because just because you didn't see it growing up as a kid doesn't mean that he didn't see it growing up as a kid. So I found that to be kind of like disrespecting. How could you tell a man what he saw? He has no reason to lie about what he saw. So he got mad. Dr. Colon was upset by the fact that Michael Wayne TV decided to put an excerpt from a video showing Puerto Ricans, Black Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico complaining about the discrimination that goes on there, as if it has no relevance to what goes on in the neighborhoods in America. Because what goes on in Latin America carries over to America. To say that somehow it doesn't happen in America is ridiculous. And then Dr. Colon will also bring up this fact, well, there were Black people that hate Puerto Ricans and Puerto Rican hate Black. It went both ways. Black people are reactionary people. We don't have a history of hating people just because we don't like the color of their skin or we don't like their religion. Black people don't have a history like that. For whatever reason, it seems like no matter if it's Hispanics, Asians, Middle Easterners, Europeans, everybody hates Black people. But they love our culture. In other words, they would rather have someone else be the face of our culture than Black people. There's a deep, in my opinion, there's a jealousy And there's an envy that's prolific amongst a lot of races. So let me find this if I can. There's a video that is on YouTube, and Frankie Cutlass appeared on a panel 10 years ago talking about Latinos in hip hop. And he talked about the jealousy that exists in the Latino community. And I'm sure Dr. Colon will say, well, you took it out of context. Well, Dr. Colon, bring Frankie Cutlass back on your platform and ask him to explain this envy and jealousy that he speaks to in the Latin community. And let me set this up. He was talking about how blacks helped him when Latinos didn't. So let me play a little bit of that clip.
He said, nah, we're going to pump this. We got the Latinos back. So it's kind of a little, sensitive to me when it comes to this whole Latino thing, because I went through a lot with the whole Latino thing. In 1997, there's a 2-page article in Source magazine, and we talked about, Latinos. And back then I was very bitter when it came to Latinos, because I seen a lot of the doors, I seen the envy and the jealousy when it came amongst the Latinos. I was getting a lot of love from the blacks, believe it or not. And I have to really say the reason why I'm probably successful today was because of the African American brothers in the industry who believed in me, who said, Latino, come on, you're gonna grow. Funk Master Flex is one of them. He approached me, Frank, who's managing you? I need this Puerto Rican, DJ/producer, rapper, whatever, by my side. And Flex there, he said, let's go, let's do it.
Now, you heard him yourself. There's a lot of jealousy and envy. And this is and it's my opinion, this is the driving force behind this 50-50. It's because there's a jealousy. Imagine you live amongst a people who accomplish so much despite how bad they've been treated for hundreds of years in this country. Black people in America have created and done so much despite all the obstacles put in our way. And here you live amongst them, and you can't even, and I don't want to sound disrespectful, but let's call it what it is. Your accomplishments as a people don't compare to what Black Americans have done. And I'm sure there's a jealousy there and an envy there. And I don't know, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know if Frankie Cutlass was speaking to that. That's why it's important for Dr. Colon, if you want to bring him on the show to explain that. But it's clear, whatever the explanation is, there's a jealousy and an envy in the Latin community towards Black people. Plain and simple. Now, let me go to this particular page here. Now, this is a Fat Joe article, probably around 2002, 2003. And it's from a book called New York Ricans from the Hip Hop Zone, written by Raquel Rivera. And these are excerpts of the book. I downloaded the PDF and I singled out certain parts. I'm going to talk about Fat Joe first, and then we're going to talk about Angie Martinez. Okay? All right. Now, they're both being interviewed. I'm going to focus on the Fat Joe one first. Okay? Now, I imagine, I don't know who the interviewer is, but I imagine it's Raquel Rivera. Okay, so she asked Fat Joe, what would you say there is any relationship between Puerto Rican culture and Latino culture and hip hop culture? And Fat Joe replies, definitely. Puerto Ricans have been a part of hip hop culture since day one. It started in the South Bronx, and most of the South Bronx is Latino. Now, it's true today, but in 1960 and the early part of 70s, Blacks outnumbered Latinos. It was only till probably the mid 70s then the Latino population started to explode. Okay, So I just want to put that in context, all right? They were definitely a part of hip hop since day one. They was the break dancers, the DJs, part of the crews. I don't know where it turned into a black music. I don't know where it turned into just a black music. Now, see, that's a denial. Of course, it's rooted in black music. What do you mean? How did it turn into black music? But see, this is part of the denial. He had this denial way back when. Okay? Now, let's go on. He says, I was so confused of how many Latinos love hip hop, but weren't in the forefront. Got lost somewhere. I don't know what happened. So he says, with me trying to become a rapper 9 years ago, I had to fill the void. I want to fill the void, just like all of us Morenos, just like all the Morenos see their culture and rappers there, people they can relate to. I want to do my videos with all the Latinos so that all the Julios and the Jose's see somebody they can relate to. Okay, so Puerto Ricans and Latinos definitely played a major part in hip hop music, and the Dominicans now very much so. So his whole intention was to see more Latinos. There's nothing wrong with that. But here's a key thing. He referenced Morenos. Now, when he's talking to his own people, he's not black, right? But when he gets amongst black folks, he's black. You see what I'm saying? So there's a different way you speak to your own people and a different way you speak to us. And that's what Latinos do. They play both sides. Let me go to the next part. So she asked another question. You say you started rapping, or you started as a rapper about 9 years ago. But your involvement with hip hop, being a part of it and listening to it, when did it start? So he says, well, since I was a baby, since I was 10 years old, I would stay up all night writing raps. And my mother and father would tell me, I'm trying to be a Negro, trying to be a Moreno, that I better pay attention in school, that's just a dream, it'll never happen. My parents were very old-fashioned, meaning they were probably racist. My father's Cuban, my mother is Puerto Rican. My father really is old-fashioned, so he didn't understand me. He didn't understand me into the music right here. But now he supports it. He's the father of Fat Joe, and can't nobody tell him nothing. So here again, he refers to Morenos, Negros, that Fat Joe is not black. He distinguishes himself from Morenos. So again, here's an issue of playing this duality here thing. When you're amongst black folks, you're black. And then when you're amongst your own people, those are those black people, we're Latinos. So, but I want you to focus on this question. I'm going to go back to this question because this question is very relevant. I'm going to read the question again. Would you say there is a relationship between Puerto Rican culture, Latino culture, and hip hop culture? Now I'm going to go to the next slide. Keep that question in your head because I'm going to set up something. I'm going to give you something to think about. Okay, now this is a part of the interview with Angie Martinez, and we know who Angie Martinez is, a DJ. One of the first question from the questioner, how did you get started into DJing? So we all know, got a good idea. Okay. So let me see the question that I really wanted to go into. Okay. On the next page, he says, do you see hip hop culture and Latino culture as being related somehow? And she replies, of course. The questioner says, how so? She says, it depends on whose lives you're talking about. So she makes a distinction. So for all Latinos, hip hop is not a part of their culture. Now, remember the question I asked you to remember that was asked of Fat Joe. It's a very similar question that was asked of Angie Martinez. How do you reconcile the difference between basically Latino Puerto Rican culture and hip hop culture? They have no problem answering that question. Now I want you to put your thinking caps on. Listen very closely. Let's change the words and say, read that question like this. Do you see hip hop culture and black culture as being related somehow? And ask that of a black American. And think about it. Your visceral reaction would be, huh? And why would your reaction be that? If someone were to ask an artist, a black artist, how do you reconcile the two cultures, hip hop and black? How do you reconcile the two? For a black person answering that question, it would be confusing because it's one and the same. It comes from black culture. But because it doesn't come from Latino culture or Puerto Rican culture, they can make the distinction. So the question, the answer, where it comes from is in the question. You follow what I'm saying? It's in the question. You will never find an article or an interview where a black artist is ever asked, how do you reconcile the two cultures? Because it's one and the same. It comes from black culture. So like I said again, sometimes you have to use your mind, your critical thinking skills. Sometimes the answer is in the question. It may not be the answer they're giving you. For the questioner to ask them that question, she sees a disconnect. And she's asking them, how do you reconcile the both of them? All right? So I just want to put that out there because it's important for us to understand that we know where it comes from psychologically. We know. So in other words, for example, what's that saying? Perception is reality or something like that. And so sometimes whatever you believe, it tends to be a reality. It doesn't always mean it's the truth, but it normally has a little bit of truth in it so that it confirms your perception, right? It's just like a stereotype. A stereotype only works if there's a little bit of truth in it. So it's not far-fetched. No one would trip over and say, oh, black culture and hip hop culture is related. Because there's some truth behind that. There's a whole lot of truth behind that. But it's not so clear with Latino or Puerto Rican culture. This is why Puerto Ricans can never answer the question, what are the Puerto Rican influences in hip hop? They stumble over that question because it's not related. Black people will never stumble over that question because it is related. All right. So I'm going to play another audio clip. Crazy Legs appeared on the World Star Report, and he was questioned about FBA culture and hip hop. And listen to his answer.
And then some, because they definitely were better DJs than Kool Herc. Like Kool Herc never learned how to cut, he never learned how to mix. Right. So he wasn't really a great DJ technically, but his selection was inspiring. Can't take that away from him ever. Now, when it comes to like, if people are talking about black people made this up, I mean, I can say, okay, well, yeah, you're right. But you got to remember, even Grand Mix and BST did not know that he was half Puerto Rican. Right. And he is one of the first DJs and one of the first B-boys. If I can jump.
Now listen. See, he admitted that hip hop comes from black people. But then he went into, you didn't know this person was black because he was dark. Or you didn't know this person was Puerto Rican because he was dark skinned. You see what I'm saying? So my point, that's called passing. That's called assimilation. If you could make people think that you're something that you're not, then you're passing. You don't get credit because you're Puerto Rican, because you wasn't telling nobody you was Puerto Rican, so you were passing. But a lot of Puerto Ricans get caught up and focus on a person's nationality and not focusing on, well, what was that individual attempting to do? Let me go on, and he's going to talk about, this is what, I'm going to play the rest of it, but this is what happens when a lot of Latinos are confronted with this question, they start playing the African card, or we're all black, or we all have a grandparent or a great grandparent that's black. We're all connected. We're all the same people. So if we're all black, why are you so white? Were you perfecting the race? Did you leave all the black people 2, 3, 4 centuries ago? Come on, man. Don't bring up the fact that we're all black, because we're not all black. Let me play what he's talking about, and you decide for yourself.
For a second, crazy boy. If crazy legs, pardon me. If I can jump in for a second, I appreciate your knowledge. With respect to what Fat Joe said, this has gone viral. Tariq Nasheed, who I respect his research, his execution, and the fact that foundational Black Americans do need to claim a lot of things that they've created. Is Fat Joe, is he off? You were there more so than most people. You have the knowledge, the history, clearly the history. What are your thoughts on
my thoughts is straight up. Look, bottom line is that at the end of the day, if you look at any kind of culture of Caribbean culture, number one, and even Puerto Ricans were originally black.
Here we go.
So that's there's no doubting our Afrocentricity or what's in our DNA. My great grandmother's a Moor. My great mother is black. My great grandmother on my father's side.
There we go. He went on, and that's what they do. Everybody got black grandparents. Everybody got black great grandparents. We're all black. We're all related. So basically what they're saying is, you know what, FBA, your accomplishments are our accomplishments, because we're all Africans. We all practice some African traditions, So even though, like I said, even though there's some African traditions are practiced in Puerto Rico, that's nothing new. Let me tell you why. Because everybody likes black culture, but hate black people. Why are those black people in Puerto Rico complaining about racism? If you love black people, if we're all the same, they're not making this stuff up. Come on, man. Let's be real here. Let me move on here. Man. But basically what I want to say, listen, full disclosure, I'm not from the Bronx. I'm not from the Bronx. But what I do have, I have a decent education and I have excellent research skills. So this whole notion of trying to devalue anybody who was not from the Bronx as not able to talk about the history. I'm not really talking about the history of Bronx. I'm talking about black culture. And I don't think you have to be from the Bronx to talk about New York black culture. You know why? Because elements of New York black culture do come from the South. If James Brown was a major influence in New York black culture, then it's a part of black culture. Anybody outside of New York is part of that culture. So to limit it to the Bronx and suggest that black people as a whole don't have a right to talk about it, don't have a right to claim it, that's full of crap, man. That doesn't even make sense. This is what you guys try to implement because you don't want to give credit to black Americans. So you make it about a region. You make it about street. And as if somehow Puerto Rican and black kids got together and created the music, created the slang. I already did a video about where all the slang comes from. It doesn't come from Puerto Rican culture. All the vernacular, all the swag, that comes from us. You just happen to be living amongst us. And just like anything, you caught on to it and you rocked with it and you adapt to it and it became your culture. But don't misunderstand where it comes from, and you're being disrespectful when you don't acknowledge that. Okay, let me see if I can move on. Give me 1 second while I wrote down some notes, and I don't want to miss anything, so let me see. Okay, let me talk about what Randy was talking about. No, let me go. Let me do this. Let me do this. Now, Dr. Colon is good for trying to take credit from Black Americans. So he'll point to things like, oh, well, you didn't create fashion because you didn't manufacture the sheepskin coat, or you didn't manufacture the track suit, the warm-up suit, the Puma sneakers, or the Pro Keds, or the Converse, whatever was being worn at the time. You don't get to take credit for that because you didn't manufacture that. So that credit goes to the white man. That's what he said. So the white man should get credit for the hip hop fashion because you didn't create any of it. Now, Dr. D, see, you're only making that argument because you hate the fact that Black people are so creative. Let me give you an example that you don't have to create something to make a fashion statement. Now, the baseball cap, Black people didn't create the baseball cap. But one day, one brother decided to put it to the side. And from that moment, millions of people, white, Black, whatever, started wearing their cap to the side. That's making a fashion statement. And this is what Black people have been doing since we've been here. We have always been the trendsetters, man. We have always laid down a foundation, what is stylish and what is cool. And everybody follows suit. Nothing has changed. But your attempt to try to diminish our value to society is amazing to me that you would continue to do that. Now, what's his name? Randy. He's another, in my opinion, delusional brother. He would say, here's another way where he's trying to diminish Black creativity. Oh, Kool Herc just didn't play funk records. He played rock and roll. He played this. He played that. Let me tell you something. If it had a beat, if it had a drum beat, a drum pattern, Black people were responsible for that. Now, how do I mean that? What are you talking about, True Saver? What are you trying to say? So let me take you guys to school here real quick. Something that you may not have known prior. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an education on the birth of the drum set. Okay? I want you to know, Dr. Colon and Randy, that every beat that ever been created on a drum set is to be credited to African Americans. If you're to be consistent, that if you didn't manufacture something, then you can't take credit for it. Now, what if I told you that the drum set was created by African Americans? Would that then mean that any beat, any break beat, any rock and roll beat, anything that was created with a drum set, does that mean that Black people should get credit for it? Again, if you're consistent, have that same energy. So let's walk you through it. Now, let me tell you something. Now, there's a lot of information about the creation of the drum set. Some articles are not going to be, it's not going to reveal the true identity. You have to read behind the lines. And I'm going to give you an example of one that you have to read behind the lines to find the identity, and one that's going to tell you outrightly who created the drum set and how American music began as a result of the creation of the drum set. Okay? So let's go to this article. This is a Smithsonian article. You can find it online, right? Matter of fact, what I'm going to attempt to do is leave a link so you can read the whole thing. I just took out a couple of excerpts to showcase how white writers will try to hide the identity of the people who created. It's nothing new. This is what white people have done throughout all of our history. Take our creations and patent it for themselves, and then they get the credit. So let me read a couple of excerpts from The Birth of the Drum Set. And some of the language is kind of cut off, but I know what it says. Here we go. Take the drum set. It is fair to say that the current collection of instruments that we think of as the drums would not have come together in quite that particular way without the influence of New Orleans culture in the beginning of the 20th century. That's the key right there. The influence of New Orleans culture. Now, New Orleans culture had a lot of different groups coming in there. It just wasn't black and white. There were Chinese, there were some even Hispanics at the time. And it talked about how all of that came together and helped create the New Orleans sound. But it was innovated and developed by African Americans. That's unquestionable. That's why when you think of New Orleans jazz, you think of African Americans. You don't think of Latinos. You don't think of Asians. You don't think of white people, because it was the African ingenuity that created the jazz. Let me continue. In the musical chemistry lab of New Orleans in the early 1900s, there was a demand for an ever-increasing variety of sounds from percussionists and a shortage of space on the stage to accommodate those instruments. Band leaders had to maximize what they could from the percussion section. The drum set was coalescing at the same time jazz was. They helped push each other along. What does that sound like? Let me say this before I tell you what it sounds like. I'm gonna read that part again. The drum set was coalescing at the same time jazz was. That means you got to read behind the lines. Jazz was created by black people. The drums was created at the same time. So who is more likely to have to create the drums? Use your head. Black people created the drum set. Let me see. Now, when I go over to the next one, since the heritage of the drum set is more explicit, and it tells you the history. Now, I'm going to read a little bit of that. The drum set is a 20th century American instrument whose historical development has largely been a result of African American creativity. It stands today as one of the most widely played, recognized, and powerful instruments used in the global stage. The trap drum set emerged in the late 1890s with a single percussionist were forced for economic and logistical reasons to operate a multitude of instruments. Snare bass drums of the concert marching bands in New Orleans provided the base of the name traps were added. The diverse sound palette enabled percussionists to accompany film, theater, and other stage shows, stage shows and dances. Additions included whistle, cowbells, timpani, chimes, marabelle, bells, bird calls, many other instruments. Chinese immigrants in urban areas in the late 19th century and early 20th century, like the small Chinese cymbals, it talked about, what the other elements were added to the drum set. Later, during the 1920s and 30s, hi-hat cymbals, at first less than 1 foot high and called low boys by Papa Joe Jones, who was a black guy, told me in 1981 that he invented the longer rod, which brought the hi-hat to its present aptly named height. But the Leedy Drum Company stole his ideas and took all the rewards. That's nothing new. That's what white people have always done. Stolen black achievement and patented for themselves, and then they get the credit for creating the drum set. But this tells you how it happened. So, Dr. Colon, if you want to keep the same energy about if you don't manufacture something, if you didn't create something, you can't claim ownership of it. You have to then accept the fact that anything played with a drum set, whether it's rock and roll, whether it's country, whether it's Latin jazz, anything, black people get the credit. Are you willing to do that, Dr. Colon? Are you willing to keep that same energy? Also, what I'm going to do, in the description, I'm going to leave links to, there's a lecture on TED Talks. I don't know if anybody heard of TED Talk. It's basically, it's a small lecture on certain topics. I'm going to provide a link to that particular topic that's going to talk about the invention of the drums, by this professor. I forget his name. I forget his name at this point. However, I will leave a link to him. He's very well accredited and he's a scholar. He's going to talk about the history. Also, in the description, I will leave a link to a video by Wynton Marsalis, who also gave a lecture with his band, his orchestra, and talked about the creation of the drums in American music. Once you review those particular videos, you will see that American blacks, the American Negro, the FBAs of this country are responsible for creating American music as we know it today. There's also a video that is on YouTube where there's a American composer named Leonard Bernstein, who in the 1950s used to give lectures on music. And he talks about the creation of American music, and he notes that American music started when jazz was created. And this is a Jewish American composer. I'm sure most people have heard of Leonard Bernstein. Okay, so there's a lot of evidence that suggests that African Americans are responsible for American music, and everything that comes from that really comes from us. So that's basically the extent of this video. Again, if you have any questions regarding anything I said in this video, feel free to make a comment. But I also need you to subscribe and to like, because there's a lot of information that I have that I like to share, because I'm sure many of you never heard that Black people are responsible for the drum set. The only American instrument ever created. Think about that. The only one. And we did that. FBAs did that. So I have a lot of wonderful information that I like to share. So if you like what you heard, please subscribe, like, share it. And until the next time, we'll talk again later.